Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be going over the dragon variation of the Sicilian after e4, c5, d6, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, g6. We begin the dragon variation, and more specifically, we're going to be going over how to meet the classical variation of the dragon Sicilian, and when exactly we should be playing the move pawn to d5 in the classical variation of the Sicilian. This is a very critical thing. So if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. So we're going to have the main stemming on point after, say, bishop g7, bishop e3, knight c6. Here's our critical kind of decision point. White needs to decide whether he's going to play knight b3 with pawn to f4 and castles, whether he's going to play knight f3 with pawn to f4 and pawn to g4 without castling, or whether he's going to keep his knight on d4 and play pawn to f4, or keep his knight on d4 and not play pawn to f4. So basically, we have four options here for white that we need to be prepared for. So in this video, we're just going to be going over white decides to keep his knight on the d4 square, and he decides to castle but not play f4. So we're going to have castles kingside, and now white's going to choose not to play the move pawn to f4. He's instead going to play either the move queen to d2, or he's going to play the move king to h1. Now, both of these moves are a little bit different, so we're going to go kind of over each of them in turn. Now, the better of the two moves is actually the move queen to d2. Queen to d2 is more of a developing move. It clears the back rank, it connects the rooks. It's a move that makes a little bit more sense. But whenever white doesn't play knight to b3 in these types of positions, we need to meet that with the move pawn to d5. Of course, the exception is pawn to f4 when they can actually meet d5 with e5. But here, nothing is really preventing black from playing the move pawn to d5, so we should absolutely play it. Pawn to d5 is basically the equalizing maneuver within the Dragon Sicilian, and basically just within open Sicilians in general. Black, generally speaking, fights to control the d5 square, and fights to eventually play d5 and equalize the position in the middle of the board. Now, after pawn to d5, white should take it. He doesn't have much of a choice here, and black should take back. Now, equalizing from here for black, as it turns out, is actually pretty simple and pretty straightforward, except for one line where you really need to be kind of prepared. If they were to play, for example, knight takes d5, equalizing is really simple, just knight takes d4. There's no desperado here with knight e7, because you're simply going to have something like queen e7, and then after everything finishes exchanging on the d4 square, the e2 bishop is hanging, and white will simply be down a piece and be lost. That means that white is going to be stuck having to play something like bishop d4, and then you're going to have queen d5, and if anybody's better here, it's actually black, because white will end up with an isolated pawn on the d4 square in most variations. He's actually got a nasty pin right now that he needs to deal with. So like rook a d1, rook f d8, and then something like c3 could get played, and then we would just have bishop takes d4, and this is going to create an isolated pawn. So even after bishop f3, queen a5, there's no preventing ending up with an isolated pawn for white. White needs to get his piece back. So these positions should be roughly equal, maybe even slight edge black, because white will have a slightly inferior pawn structure. So the way that white needs to try to play this is he needs to play the move knight c6, and then black should reply with bc6, and then if white continues exchanging pieces, like with knight d5, it gets really easy for black to play his position. He can actually play either queen d5 or cd5, but queen d5 is probably the best move, and then after queen d5, bishop f3, queen d2, bishop d2, rook b8 should actually be slight advantage black. Just if anybody's better here, it's black. The whole queen side is having some issues over here, and it's probably going to fall apart. So going back, the correct move here is rook a d1, and this is actually white's best chance in these lines in the classical where white kind of plays passively and allows black to play d5. This is white's best chance to play for some type of advantage or to play for some type of win. The whole point is that even though the position is objectively equal, it's actually a very difficult position for black to play once we get to the endgame. So after, say, queen c7, we're going to have knight d5, cd5, queen d5, bishop e6, queen c5. We're going to be exchanging, and then we're going to take on b2. Now, at this point, we've achieved objective equality. The pawns are completely equal. Black's pawn structure on the surface might actually look a little bit better because White has 2 isolated pawns, but black only has 1. But that's just on the surface. In reality, white's pawn structure is a smidge better than black's. And the reason for that is after pawn to a4 and say something like bishop f6, even though white has the split pawns, white has the more dangerous pawns. And this position is going to be objectively level even if we end up exchanging all of our queenside pawns for each other. So the fact that white has the more dangerous passed pawns here makes white's position just slightly more scarier than black's. And it also means that if you want to play this position with the black pieces, and you want to play this d5 equalizing maneuver in the dragon in general, you need to familiarize yourself with endgames like this so that you don't get into trouble in these endgames and you don't end up accidentally losing this position when, again, objectively, this should be completely equal and you should be able to go on to draw here. But in practice, a lot of players have lost this position with the black pieces from here because it is a very difficult position to play in terms of the practical chances for white versus black here. So going back, all those positions should be okay for black. All of that stuff should be at least equality, and of course in some cases slight edge black. So how do you respond to this other attempt at basically the same thing for white? How do you respond to this move king h1, which is essentially the same idea as queen d2? We're not doing anything to prevent the move pawn to d5. So of course we should play d5. But this version of it is actually a little bit better than when the queen's on d2. And of course the reason for that is that tricky variation leading to that endgame where white has some chances no longer exists, since the queen is not on the d2 square, the rooks aren't connected, so rook a d1 is no longer possible. So after e takes d5, knight takes d5, we can still meet the move knight takes d5 with the move knight takes d4, which is complete equality. But what's interesting is because the queen is on the d1 square, we have this additional option that is now a lot more playable than it was before. We can play the move queen takes d5, and then after the move bishop f3, the idea is to shuffle the queen over to a5, and what we're hoping for is that they're going to go for this extra pawn here, and they're going to play knight c6, bc6, because if they actually take this extra pawn, black actually has a major advantage after rook to b8, because white's whole queen side is going to be falling apart here. So this is a trick that we used to play for kind of back in the day. So the other move is just knight d4 in complete equality, very similar to the other line. So they're both very playable moves here. So what are they supposed to play here after e d5, knight d5? They're not supposed to play knight d5, they're supposed to play knight c6, much like in the other variation. So knight c6, we're going to play bc6, and they could play the move knight takes d5 here, but life just gets kind of really simple here. We're just going to play c takes d5, and really this position is just slight edge black. So knight c6 just isn't much of a move here. After bc6, knight d5, cd5, it's slight edge black. And as you can see, unlike in the previous position, there isn't really the option of doing anything else. We're not going to be able to play this move rook ad1 because the queen is occupying that square. So the move rook ad1 doesn't actually exist here. So just kind of to recap, against both queen d2 and king h1, you're going to be responding with the move d5, and this move should completely equalize. There's one tricky endgame in the queen d2, followed by rook ad1 lines that you have to be familiar with, so that you don't end up getting into trouble in those endgames and end up losing your equal position. But for the most part, all the positions are either complete equality, or they're going to be slight edge black once you get into your free maneuver with the move pawn to d5. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use a lot of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.